So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need a political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Hey, thanks for watching our live stream. I'm the host, David Krayden. In the meantime, have a look at some of these clips and take the opportunity, please, to like this broadcast, ring the bell, or subscribe.
And we're stepping up in every way we can because we know that Russia must win this war. That Ukraine must win this war.
But freedom is something you earn every day.
I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist. So we're coming at you live from Ottawa right now. Earlier in the day, of course, I sat down with Jeff Rath, who was part of the contingent. I want to make this quite clear at the beginning of the broadcast. He was part of the contingent from Alberta that went down to Washington, D.C. to meet with key Trump aides at the cabinet level. Jeff Rath was part of a triumvirate that came from Alberta to Washington, and Donald Trump has given his approval of Alberta independence. He will recognize an independent Alberta. Now, that is, of course, extremely, extremely important. And so, but before we go to this interview, I want to make it quite clear that, just like we got comments coming on here. I can't get rid of them. All right, there we go. And I want to make it quite clear that I just got off the phone with Katie Passatney of the Universal Ostrich Farms. She's given me an update on what's happening out there. So after the Jeff Rath interview, we'll have the segment devoted to the latest. And of course, one of the birds died yesterday, and it seems to be apparently because of gross neglect. The CFIA is out of control, is off the rails. This cannot continue. And like I said, Katie will be on the show next week at some point, and we'll be giving you updates as required. God only knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but we'll have our eyes peeled. So let's go to this interview with Jeff Rath right now. And after that, we will talk about Universal Ostrich Farms and what Katie is saying. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest, of course, Jeff Rath, legal counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Project. And before we get started, Jeff, I just wanted to show you a clip here. I just find this unbelievable. This is the leader of the Bloc Québécois.
To announce a deal with Enbridge and some other major companies to put forward a pipeline proposal, an oil pipeline. Fortunately for you, I think it's not going to go to Quebec, it's going to go to BC. You've been critical of the Alberta government before. What do you make of them going forward with this?
Let's imagine that Quebec is an independent and free country. We will go on the world stages to say that Alberta is destroying the environment of the whole planet.
The whole planet. Wow. Just Alberta. That's incredible. I know you recently met with the PQ. I think they were probably a little more reasonable than this guy, this blockhead, who is just talking nonsense. But when you hear stuff like that, material like that, I mean, what do you think? Are these people living in the same universe as the rest of us?
Well, I think what that tells us is that any dream that Danielle Smith has of getting some sort of pipeline deal done with Canada is complete, is complete fantasy, right? So, Carney said repeatedly that, for him to approve a pipeline is going to require a national consensus. And read that from Carney's perspective, for me to approve a pipeline, it's going to require me staying in power. And it seems to me that Mr. Blanchette is saying that, any pipeline approval, if he's true to his word and he actually believes that Alberta oil and gas development is more dangerous to the world than the arteries clogged by poutine, right? That he's not going to support Carney's government if Carney approves a pipeline. So again, it just underlines to Albertans why Canada doesn't work, why we need to get out of Canada, and why this entire country is broken. and that from an Alberta perspective, we just need to get the hell out.
Well, I have a clip from Danielle Smith earlier this week. I want to talk about that, but let's get to the real news here. Of course, you met again with high-level, cabinet-level members of the President Donald Trump administration this week. Tell us about it. What transpired, and what do you think the consequences will be?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big things is I think it's sent a bit of a shockwave through both the provincial government in Edmonton and Carney's government in Ottawa. I mean, our contacts with the Trump administration are every bit as good as theirs, right? And and obviously, these meetings wouldn't be taking place if there wasn't a massive amount of support within the Trump administration, if not from the president himself, for a free and independent Alberta, for self-determination for the province of Alberta. In the same way that President Trump announced in his joint address to Congress that he supported self-determination for Greenland, it's clear that the Trump administration, as a matter of policy, supports self-determination for Alberta, right? So, that's the first big takeaway. And then, the nature of these conversations and the meetings, are confidential, but it wouldn't surprise anybody to know that the types of things that we would be talking to them about would be, immediate recognition for Alberta by the United States as an independent country upon a successful referendum, immediately upon the United States recognizing Alberta as an independent country upon a successful referendum, that we would immediately enter into the shortest free trade agreement in world history, being less than one page of paper that says simply that there will be complete free trade between Alberta and the United States, that there will be no tariffs on either side of the American and Alberta border, that there would be a free transposition of goods and services between Alberta and the United States with zero tariffs, and that the U.S. and Alberta effectively would create a common market between our two countries that would allow us both to prosper. So those obviously would have been the major topics of conversation from our perspective. We also would have wanted to talk to the U.S. about the benefits to the United States of an independent Alberta. One of the biggest benefits to the United States, obviously, of an independent Alberta is freeing up the world's third largest oil reserves from control by a Communist Party of China adjacent government in Ottawa. I mean, we now live in a country, Canadians now live in a country where the Prime Minister of Canada is more closely aligned with the Communist Party of China than he is with our largest ally in the United States of America. And we see that every time, and I think Carney is literally one of the biggest drivers, obviously is one of the biggest drivers of independence for Alberta. Every time we turn around, the man does something new that's completely stupid and complete anathema to the province of Alberta and the United States, that does nothing but benefit communist China. I mean, we just have to go back last week. The government of Canada, the Parliament of Canada, in response to a resolution put forward by Pierre Poilievre, who also seems to be wanting to support Alberta independence, put forward a resolution to say that they were going to end the carbon cap on the province of Alberta. And Carney and his government voted unanimously to maintain the carbon cap against the government of Alberta. So obviously that's not in the U.S. interest that, Carney's, because a carbon cap is effectively an emissions cap, let's be straight, right? So, the United States of America doesn't favor, Alberta oil being shut in. It doesn't favor production caps in Alberta. The United States wants Albertans to be able to produce as much oil as they can physically produce to help the United States maintain a stable and affordable oil price, so that people don't have to pay more for gasoline at the pumps, diesel fuel to move their goods, and to allow both, the Alberta economy and the U.S. economy to thrive, right? I mean, everybody knows, or anybody who isn't an idiot, knows that one of the largest inputs to, the price of goods in North America, is the cost of energy. So, we all want, stable, low energy prices. And Mark Carney in Communist China wants to continue to make sure that the economy of North America does not function as well as it should, because a North American economy functioning at full capacity, the Chinese see that as a threat to their global hegemony. Full stop. And I mean, we're Glenn Beck. I can now say that we were at the State Department, right? Because Glenn Beck apparently this week confirmed that and has released that to the public. So that's out in the public. So obviously, I mean, the U.S. State Department, one of its biggest roles is offsetting, Chinese plans for total global domination and the ongoing efforts of the Chinese to cripple the North American economy, whether it's through cyber attacks, flooding our countries with fentanyl, now using Canada, as the major source of fentanyl manufacture, in North America to destroy, the United States and Canada from within, et cetera. So obviously, I mean, the U.S. State Department and the U.S. government has a national interest in thwarting, these evil tactics and strategies being deployed by China in furtherance of its global domination. So I mean, and obviously from an Alberta perspective, and as a guy with an honors degree in poli-sci that at one point in his life was studying foreign policy and was as an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics. I mean, these are the types of things that we agree with the U.S. State Department, and see that Alberta, and Canada should have the same interest. But Mark Carney, unfortunately, apparently is more communist Chinese than he is North American.
Well, yes, that's more his direct affiliation has been over the years. Interesting that Trump would talk about an independent Alberta and not the 51st state. He's still talking about Canada as the 51st state. Whether he's jesting or not, it's hard to say. But he specifically talked about Alberta as an independent Alberta, not as necessarily a 51st state. So,
well, there's a reality to that. I mean, that was that again hypothetically would have been one of the things that could have been discussed at that meeting. And that is that from our perspective and a U.S. perspective in the State Department, there's a recognition that for Alberta to become a state, and it's the same way that Alaska became a state. They had the Democrats were concerned that conservative Republican Alaska, very much the same types of attitudes, as real Albertans, independent, want to stand on their own, want very little government interference in their lives. That Alaska would want to be, or if they brought Alaska into the Union, that Alaska would add 2 more Senate seats to the Republican side of the ledger. So the trade-off was they brought Hawaii in at the same time, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
So let's have the hang loose people from Hawaii come in and they'll vote Democrat, and the Alaskans will vote Republican, and there's a balance. So, the Republicans, I think, are of the view that if they tried to bring Alberta in as a state, that the Democrats in the Senate would be demanding not just Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as a trade-off. And there's no appetite on the southern side of the border right now to open up any discussions of statehood, because I don't think there's any interest in further upsetting the balance of power either in the Congress or the Senate by creating 2 states that would vote overwhelmingly Democrat.
Yeah, I think
it shouldn't surprise anybody that would be the conversation, or that would be the that would be the position of Republicans in the United States and the U.S. administration.
Yeah, wanted to get your comment on this this counter referendum that's going on here from this former MLA. Do you believe these numbers? He's claiming 233,000 signatures. I frankly find that hard to believe, Chief.
Well, we were surprised by it, but apparently, I mean, I've confirmed it. Apparently, they've turned in to Elections Alberta 230,000 signatures. But when you look at the fact that they're going in and they're gathering signatures from people with dementia in memory care units and old folks' homes, and all of these places where people haven't got a clue as to what they're signing, that people don't even understand what the question really means. Remain in Canada, like forever or whatever. Like, what does that question mean? It's already been referred to by a judge as a legally irrelevant nothing burger of a question. The judge's words were nothing burger, not mine. So the judge referred to that question as a legally irrelevant nothing burger. So, our attitude is, first of all, we are, we're surprised that, that the CASIC was that organized, but, they had all the unions on side, all of the lefties were on, all the left-wing people in Alberta were on side and were going out working for them. So, we're not shocked that that's where they're at. They have 25 days to go. They'll probably need another 100,000 signatures if they're to have a buffer, to make sure that, all of their signatures comply. And then at that point, it's kind of a big so what? I mean, they put forward a policy question that's not binding, right? The question that we're going to be putting forward will be a binding constitutional question. Under the Referendum Act, our question has to be held as a standalone, as a standalone question, right? So by the time little Tommy's question gets on a referendum ballot with a bunch of other questions, first of all, everybody in Alberta could vote no, which just opens the door, to our question. Second of all, the government has the discretion as to whether to put that question on the ballot or not, or to put our question on the ballot, because obviously, that question of CASIC doesn't comply with the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act requires that a question leading to separation states that the province wants to cease being a province of Canada and wishes to become an independent country, which is what our question does, right? So the CASIC question really doesn't mean anything, from that perspective. It just is what it is, frankly. Did it surprise me that he could, be that organized? A little bit, but again, he's a former deputy premier. He's got all of the former socialist, progressive, conservative, welfare premiers on side, like Fast Eddie Stelmach, and a lot of the progressive conservative ilk that that do very well on government subsidies and handouts, right? So it's not totally surprising, right? He told Danielle several months ago that he had 147,000, or a month and a half ago that he had 147,000 signatures, and I kind of shrugged at the time and I said, "Oh, with those numbers, you'll probably make us 300."
Yeah, but I suppose it's feasible. It's feasible. As you say, he's scouting the outer regions of the province to find some of these people.
Well,
so,
the other thing is too. There's an issue for him, because I think under the old act, to get a question on the ballot, that you needed to have 10% of the vote from 2/3 of the constituencies in Alberta. And I'm not sure that they'd managed to pull that off, or that they're going to manage to pull that off either. I'm sure they got a lot of signatures in Edmonton, right? I'm sure they've gotten quite a few signatures, from old folks' homes in Calgary, right? But do they have 10% from 2/3 of the constituency associations across the province? It's doubtful. So, but we'll see. We'll see. Again, like as the judge said, we just see the whole thing as a big nothing burger, and we're not overly concerned about it at this time.
were you surprised? We were talking yesterday, and you said you weren't really surprised, but I was surprised that Pierre Poilievre this week said, "Don't pay any attention to what the premiers say or do. It's all up to Mark Carney in terms of a pipeline." This guy has a seat now in Alberta, supposedly, and he's supposedly fighting for Alberta as a member of Parliament. Why would he say something like that? Because this seems to me to be playing right into Carney's hands.
Well, Jenny Byrne must still be giving him political advice. I'm not sure, right? He's been stepping all over Danielle. And Danielle, unfortunately, and I say this and I mean this, unfortunately, Danielle is one of Pierre's big supporters, one of Pierre Poilievre's big supporters. And in fact, I know for a fact, talking to, Mitch Sylvester and talking to other people that are very, very close to the government, Mitch has excellent connections. He's a constituency association president, that the main reason that Danielle Smith did not just instantly repatriate the Alberta pension and send a letter to Alberta pension or the Canadian pension plan demanding that they return Alberta the $365 billion of the pension plan fund that belonged to Albertans, is that Pierre Poilievre literally begged her not to, because that would make his life more difficult running for prime minister. And so Danielle, oh yes, we have to get a conservative government in Ottawa because, conservative government in Ottawa will be the savior of Alberta. So, Danielle did not repatriate, the Alberta pension plan, Canadian pension plan dollars at the behest and whining of Pierre Poilievre. Then Pierre Poilievre last week really screwed Danielle when he put forward that motion on the carbon cap. Because don't forget, Danielle's been burning political capital like a drunk lighting cigars with $100 bills, right? By going, I'm getting along really well with Mark Carney, and my new boyfriend, Mark Carney, and I are getting along really well, and he's a really good guy, and he's going to give us what we want, and, I'm wooing him, and he's been wooing me, and oh my goodness, we're going to get pipelines, and the world is going to be so wonderful because Mark Carney's really a good guy, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, and of course she's getting nothing. So she hasn't got one of the 9 that she refers to as the bad laws repealed. She hasn't gotten a pipeline. And then last week along goes, and every time you turn around, she says, I'm on Team Canada, and I'm so excited. Look, I'm wearing my red blazer and my white shirt, and I'm dressed up like a Canadian flag, and I'm so happy to be part of Team Canada. Like she's doing all that. And then, along comes Blanchette, that there never be an Alberta pipeline because Alberta oil is filthy oil and it's polluting the world. Or David Eby, it's like, our pristine British Columbia coast will not be polluted with Alberta oil, and all this, garbage, right? Every time, and I've said this more than once, because this has been going on for 6 months. Every time Danielle says that she's on Team Canada and this is going to get her a pipeline, one of these bozos, whether it's Eby or Blanchette or Legault, come out and literally cross-check her in the mouth. So like she's on this Team Canada, and every time she turns around, she gets elbowed in the head, cross-checked in the mouth, punched in the face, whatever. Who wants to be on that team, right? So there's been 6 months of this. Like our political capital has just been flying out the window, right? And then last week it was the same thing, right? It's like, Pierre Poilievre thinks it's a good idea for his perspective, because that's all he cares about is what's good for him, right? Not what's good for Danielle and not what's good for Albertans. Puts forward this motion on, the carbon cap on Alberta industry, and the Carney government votes unanimously to say no. So that left Danielle with like no room to move. She's looking really stupid because she's given Carney 6 months. Not only has she gotten nothing from Carney with regard to these so-called bad 9 laws, tanker ban, carbon cap, et cetera, et cetera. Carney again just slaps her in the teeth, votes along with all of his Liberal members to unanimously vote to uphold in Parliament the emissions cap and effectively production cap on Alberta oil and gas. And then that left Danielle with no room other than to come forward with this desperate gambit. And I call it her pipeline proponent gambit, where, she announces this big fanfare and, oh my goodness, we have this major announcement coming out. I'm going to make this major announcement. And then she announces that, she's going to go on her hands and knees and beg Mark Carney as a project proponent for a pipeline through British Columbia. For Albertans, this was just like an embarrassment, and I think you and I were talking about this offline, so I'll try to keep my language a bit, on a Sunday morning here, try to keep my language a little bit more in line. But, Albertans are going, what the F and F is going on here? Like going and begging the effing federal government for an effing pipeline? Like, are you effing out of your mind, right? That's the reaction of the normal, the normal Albertan. And of course, what happened was that Poilievre left her no room politically other than to do that. And then when she does it, so she's now, literally has her butt hanging out in the wind, then Poilievre comes out and says, oh, and by the way, the only person in Canada that can approve a pipeline is Mark Carney. So everybody just needs to ignore any provincial premier who has anything to say about pipelines. And so again, she came out with her pipeline proponent gambit, and then Poilievre stepped all over her.
There's going to be a little bit of pushback here. We already have the premier to the west of us.
Sorry to interrupt there. I wanted to show you this clip because it's interesting to me. Danielle almost sounds like she's giving a pitch for separation, independence in this clip without exactly doing
Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of pushback here. We already have the premier to the west of us calling this not realistic, essentially a distraction. So how do you plan to deal with some of the opponents to this project, whether it's the premier next door, whether it's some of these indigenous groups, whether it's just activists who don't want a pipeline?
So I will continue, as I said, to work to build the coalition of partners who are going to be on board with this. But this is a Canada project, and this is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other.
Yeah, well, and again,
what do you say?
Well, she's playing both sides against the middle, right? I mean, she's embarrassed, right? And she's rightly embarrassed, right? You know, and this is what she's been doing. And then on top of it, I mean, she's basically now, you know, she's trying to reset the clock because her 6 months is coming up, you know, at the end of October. So, you know, she's been, you know, privately signaling to everybody that there's going to be some, and not so privately maybe now, but that there's going to be some big announcement before Grey Cup that's going to be a complete game changer, right? And so maybe she thinks that by putting this pipeline, like begging, for a pipeline by being project proponent, that Mark Carney might actually, oh my goodness, condescend to put her pipeline proponent project on the list, on the next list of federal major projects, right? Potential federal projects 5 or 10 years from now, right? So that's what's going on. So, and again, from our perspective is, first of all, Danielle, so what that you're applying for a pipeline, you know, as a pipeline proponent? It's embarrassing that the Premier of Alberta and the government of Canada have created economic conditions and regulatory conditions that are so abysmal that nobody with capital wants to put this project forward on their own, and that the government has to do that. I mean, that indicates how broken Canada is, that we can only get projects like this built if, a 5-year planning office in the government comes out with its 5-year plan and puts the project on the list, and then industry itself won't even build it. You know, the government has to come forward as as the proponent to build the project. To me, it sounds a lot like Mussolini's Italy, Stalin's Russia. You know, major projects get built on a 5-year plan with the government, being the ones leading the projects, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's embarrassing that, that she's tacitly admitting that she's standing for or accepting, an economic condition or a country that is so broken that only the government can make these kinds of projects happen, is point one. And then, point two, is that, she's making it absolutely clear that, Canada's not working, but she hasn't, to say, like she said 6 months ago, oh, well, unless I get my 9 bad laws struck down, right? This is going to create a national unity crisis, right? So she gave him 6 months. We're now at the date for the national unity crisis. And now she's literally, scrambling to try to create herself another 6 months of breathing room where she can run around the province in her red blazer and her white shirt dressed up like a Canadian flag saying that she's on Team Canada. So, I mean, none of us are impressed. I mean, it's, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of Danielle Smith apologists in Alberta, that are saying that, oh yeah, this is all just a big mind game on her part. And she's trying to teach Albertans that Canada doesn't work. And she's trying to bring along the soft middle to separation because she's just proving to everybody once and for all that there's no fixing Canada. I'm sure she's doing that, but I don't think she's doing it on purpose. Right. I honestly, everybody thinks she's playing chess. I don't even know that she's playing checkers that well.
Well, certainly she's walking a high wire tightrope right now, and it's extremely, I think, exacting upon her. But for me,
I don't think that's the analogy anymore, David. I think she's floundering around in the net underneath the high wire, trying to figure out how she's going to get out.
That might be a little rough. But
no, but it's true, right? I mean, it's like she gave him 6 months to fix things. Well, have we seen anything get fixed? No. And literally on the eve of the 6 month deadline, they voted unanimously in Parliament to extend the carbon cap and emission cap on Alberta and the production cap on Alberta. So,
Well,
how has she accomplished anything in these 6 months other than, show Albertans that Canada is well and truly doesn't want Alberta as part of the country?
well, when she was at these town hall meetings, and I think that at least showed how she takes the situation very seriously, and she's accounting for that. But she talked about somehow recouping equalization payments at one particular meeting, and I covered that as a story one morning. And I thought, I don't know if this is going to work the way you're outlining it. But for me, the best argument that you have in advocating for Alberta independence is that equalization ain't ever going to change in this country because Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada is committed to it. And
well, that's why that's why
yeah.
we put together this document called "The Value of Freedom," where we show that Alberta currently in CPP, UI, and tax revenue sends $70 billion plus a year to Ottawa, and we get less than $20 billion a year back. An independent Alberta, free from, Canada and so-called equalization, would have a $30 to $50 billion a year fiscal capacity surplus after funding our own armed forces, tripling the spend on Indigenous people in Alberta, paying for our own immigration and deportation program, paying for our own border security and border patrol, et cetera, et cetera. Like, the numbers just do not add up for Alberta to stay in Canada. And I've said more than once, Mitch Sylvester actually personally hand-delivered a copy of this document to Danielle at a meeting that they had. And, we've been hand-delivering them to MLAs and, and others in the government. And we're telling them, unless you enact that document and unless you support Alberta independence, you are violating your fiduciary obligation to the citizens of Alberta. You're mismanaging this province, you're mismanaging our finances, and who elected you to continue to preside over sending $70 billion a year to Ottawa when we only get $50 billion a year, we only get $20 billion a year back in questionable quality services and a bunch of transfers that have all these strings attached to them, like Canada Health Act transfers. Where they tell Alberta that we can't drastically reform our healthcare system by bringing in private options so that people that have money can actually get healthcare in Alberta instead of having to go spend millions of dollars at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona and so on, right? Those are the types of things Albertans want, but we can't do it because of the Canada Health Act. And they keep threatening to cut off our health transfers if we do. We want Ottawa completely out of Alberta. And now the next thing is, and this is, I guess this is kind of news, but, Mitch Sylvester and others that are affiliated with the independence movement are organizing a massive rally in Edmonton at the legislature on the 25th of October because of the Carney's planned ongoing gun grab. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
And again, we heard, and I can't even pronounce his name, or even remember his name, but
the public safety minister.
Yeah. Minister Chipmunk, who, doesn't even know, what a PAL or an RPAL is, telling one of his constituents that this whole program, is simply in place to appease voters in Quebec and to make sure that Liberals keep getting elected in Montreal. Right. So, basically Albertans are going to, lose or become criminals if they don't turn in, legally owned firearms that have never been ever once used in the commission of a criminal offense in Canada. Like, certain people have like 28-pound target rifles that have been criminalized, right, or prohibited. That they've been shooting legally on their farms and ranches, or for decades, that have now just a stroke of a pen because Justin Trudeau got a memo from his handlers in the Ministry of State Security in Communist China, telling him the Chinese would be a lot more comfortable if Canadians didn't have rifles that were capable of taking out an engine block on a Chinese BMP in their possession when the Chinese roll into Canada. All of a sudden these firearms end up on a list. Or alternatively, 22 caliber gopher rifles, that have been listed simply because they look scary, right? I mean, on and on and on. And then Trudeau's benighted plan was to box all of these things up into containers and ship them to Ukraine, which is ludicrous. I mean, you're ex-military, I'm military, right? So, think about, like the utility of container loads of mixed matched firearms that don't have standardized ammunition, standardized magazines, maintenance manuals, whatever. I mean, could you imagine a Russian Spetsnaz unit trembling at the sight of a bunch of 65-year-old conscripts holding, confiscated Canadian gopher rifles?
No,
right?
it's
I mean, it's the whole thing is I mean, it's ludicrous, right? And this is how policy has been made in Canada, and why Albertans are so fed up. We see this. It's like the ostrich farm thing. It's a private property issue. These firearms are property of people in Alberta that have been using this property legally and lawfully for decades. We're not a problem, but all of a sudden somebody in Ottawa decides that our property offends a bureaucrat. So all of a sudden we're told that unless our property is turned over for destruction by the Canadian government, right, that we're going to be criminalized. It's basically the ostrich issue writ large from coast to coast to coast in Canada.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to touch on that briefly here, because I don't think the federal government has ever looked more ravenous than it does right now with the gun grab. They've got 3 censorship bills in front of Parliament, possibly a 4th, actually. You can actually say there's 4 censorship bills to restrict free speech, censor anybody on the internet. We've got grand surveillance programs. Not a word, by the way, from Pierre Poilievre about any of these censorship bills.
Oh, of course not.
And
of course not.
and the ostriches. I didn't know the CFIA was a criminal organization that acted above the law, that could act with impunity from animal cruelty legislation. It can do basically whatever the hell it wants, and without anybody questioning this in the government. And of course, Poilievre says, well, it's incompetent. But he manages to answer the question about the ostriches without mentioning ostrich in the answer. And it's extremely unnerving to listen to him talk about this issue, because he doesn't want to say this is gross negligence, this is outrageous overreach of government. He just wants to say, well, just another example of liberal incompetence. And farmers are confused. No, farmers are not confused. Farmers know what the hell this government wants. They want their property, they want their land, they want their animals, and they want their livelihood. That's what this liberal government wants. And is Canada working for Katie Passanay and the folks who own that farm? Absolutely not. Canada's not working. I don't know what their politics are in terms of Alberta independence, British Columbia independence. I know they're very angry with this liberal government and with Mark Carney doing nothing, and with Pierre Poilievre giving half-assed responses like that. So has there ever been a better time?
Pierre Poilievre is no friend of freedom. He no friend of Alberta. I mean, I was saying that when he was running, when he was running in Battle River Crowfoot. I mean, he ran in the federal election on the basis that he would maintain transfer payments for Quebec because he wanted to get elected in Quebec. He also said that he was going to do nothing to touch supply management. Apparently now dairy's on the table in the trade talks with Mark Carney, so elbows down, right? As they had been, they had to be. I mean, we're not, but again, to what degree has our national economy been jeopardized, right, by Mark Carney perpetuating this foolish trade war? I mean, they should have gotten rid of supply management on day one, the minute Carney was elected. It's one of the biggest trade irritants for the Trump administration. It's almost like number one on their hit list, and it's such a small portion of our economy. Who cares, other than for the, to the extent that they don't want to give up votes in Quebec. But we're gonna destroy the national economy because there's basically a dairy cartel in Quebec that has been making billions off of this. And keep in mind, when we talk about the dairy cartel, if it wasn't for supply management, everything that they're doing would offend the Competition Act and would be illegal. I mean, it's like it's what they do with milk and dairy in this province is like what the Westons were doing with bread on steroids, right? And it's not a measly 75 cents a loaf or 25 cents a loaf or whatever it is. This is, they literally have jacked up the price of milk and cheese and dairy products and eggs and pork and whatever in this province in this country by 400%. So think about that, right? Every working poor family, which is now almost everybody in Canada, is paying 400% more for milk, dairy, and milk and dairy than they should be. Every poor Indigenous family in this province, in this country, is paying 400% more for milk and dairy than they should be. Every single mom in this country, is being preyed on by these people, and our government just maintains it because it's important to maintain votes in Quebec. Canada is governed, and I've been saying this for years, by one of the most corrupt governments and systems of government in the world. I mean, I think you'd have to go back to the old Soviet Union to see how badly Canada is now being operated. I mean, Canada used to work, on a system, where, and again, the only real checks and balances in our system under the Canadian Constitution, was the principle of responsible government and, quaint 19th century notions of honor, right? So this is why the Prime Minister is right honorable and ministers are honorable, right? So if a minister gets caught trying to fix a parking ticket for one of his donors or whatever it is, that's something that's dishonorable and they're expected to resign. I mean, back in the 70s, ministers would be forced to resign, if they were found doing the things that our public safety minister did recently.
Yeah.
By offering to pay for his, everybody else can go screw themselves, but with your guns, just tell me how much money you're going to be cheated, when you turn your guns in, and I'll personally make up the difference out of my campaign funds. I'm sure it wouldn't be out of the minister's personal pocket, so that you'll be okay, screw everybody else, right? I mean, if that had been Bryce Mackesy or anybody in the 70s, that minister would have been expected to resign, because that is not honorable behavior, right? But all those quaint notions, obviously, of honor and and right honorable behavior went out the window during the Trudeau regime. I mean, there's been a slow erosion over time, but the SNC Lavalin scandal, where you've got SNC funneling money,
yes,
into the government, and then it turns out that SNC is a company whose corporate practices include, hiring prostitutes to secure government contracts and whatever else, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And then scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal. Do you think Trudeau would resign? Of course not, because the word right honorable has completely lost any meaning. Like back in the day in Great Britain, if a prime minister had behaved in such an embarrassing manner to Queen Victoria, they would be expected to immediately tender their resignation. Let's go back to Krayden, the whole ad scam, scandal, right? Where they're funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into the pockets of, various Quebec lieutenants to buy votes in the 95 referendum, right? To this day, all of those files are sealed, and we're not allowed to know, who in Quebec were receiving all of the bribes and who was paying all of the bribes. I mean, that's one of the reasons. It was interesting. Monsieur Plamondon was sharing that story with us. He said that was one of the reasons that he became a péquiste, was that when he was a young lawyer working at the big national firm he was at, that firm was attached to the ad scam inquiry. And when he saw the level of corruption, in the federal government, and the degree to which the federal government would just openly and blatantly corrupt and bribe its way through the politics of Quebec, at that moment, Monsieur Plamondon became a committed péquiste and was committed to getting Quebec out of Canada, just because of all of the corruption, in the Canadian regime in Ottawa. So, I mean, exactly. Canada's become a kleptocracy, and now nobody turns a hair at Carney's 103, ethics
conflicts of interest.
The man's only been in power for 5 months, and he's got 103 ethics violations. I'm sure there's more than that now.
Well,
I mean, and I don't think anybody, I challenge anybody to name a project that made the national major projects list that doesn't have a Brookfield tie-in, that's not going to basically funnel money from the Canadian taxpayer, into a major project through Brookfield into Carney's offshore bank account.
Yeah,
Canada's literally become a joke. We're the most corrupt country in the world.
With an authoritarian government that just wants us to suffer, and I think Marxist Carney is the best argument you have for Alberta independence. It remains that, and you're not getting any help from the official opposition. So all I can say, Jeff, is that I don't think things have looked better for your cause since perhaps the twilight years of Pierre Trudeau. And I would think if you're not at 50% support now for independence in Alberta, I think you're going to get there within the next 6 months. So I know you're working hard on this issue, and we're going to continue to watch what happens. And I think what you're doing and what you're calling for might just be inevitable.
Well, I mean, I think it is. And I don't know if you've heard of Martin Armstrong, but Armstrong Economics. You should actually look him up and look up Armstrong Economics on Alberta independence. Armstrong has a really, really solid track record at determining political outcomes by an analysis of economic factors. And Armstrong Economics has actually predicted that Alberta will be an independent country within 2 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's
incredible.
I really do. And I think everybody in Alberta has a sense now that it's inevitable. And even, Danielle Smith with her recent, this is a test for Canada as a country. I mean, the reason that she keeps playing both sides against the middle is that she's trying to be very careful to try to hang on to the reins of power. And she's literally told people, well, I'm not going to become a David Cameron, and resign if, Alberta votes itself independent. I think the real question for Danielle is whether or not she can continue playing both sides against the middle and hold on to her base, because her base is just shaking their head every time she comes out with anything now. And more people are not believing anything she says. I mean, she still has diehard supporters and apologists in Alberta, but people are looking on more and more with complete disbelief. Anytime and you notice she hasn't said I'm on Team Canada or I believe in a strong Alberta within a united Canada in the last week, right? Yeah. I mean, that used to be her tagline slogan. It was almost like, I'm Jesse Waters and this is my world, right? Yeah. Danielle almost closed off everything she said with, I believe in a strong Alberta within a united Canada. We haven't heard that from her in the last week, so who knows?
No, we haven't. Jeffrey Rath, legal counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Project, advocate for Alberta independence. Thanks for coming on the show again. We're going to stay in touch, and there's so much happening right now. It's hard to keep up with everything, but we're going to keep up with the story. Thank you again, Jeff.
No, thank you, David. It's always an honor and a pleasure to come on, so thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
You bet. Thanks.
And of course, with Jeff Rath, legal counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Project, advocate for Alberta independence. And it's very important to note that Jeff was part of the group and that went down to visit with Donald Trump's key cabinet members and advisors. And Donald Trump has lent his support to Alberta independence. So this is big, big news. National Post printed it. As far as I know, though, Jeff has not been interviewed by any podcasters, broadcasters, or mainstream media since he's come back from Washington. So this is big news. We're proud to be carrying the story here. Proud to be carrying it. Wanted to show you something here, and if the producer could put this on the screen. This is once again a clarification of what the Supreme Court is up to here, or what the Supreme Court has ruled in terms of the respondent being the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in this case. And the Supreme Court clearly states in its order that the respondent, CFIA, shall maintain custody of the birds that are subject to the notice to dispose, and the applicant shall not interfere with the respondent's custody of the birds, pending the decision on this motion and the application for leave to appeal. Is the CFIA exercising proper custody? What do you think of when you hear custody? Well, if you have custody of your children, you're supposed to be looking after them, caring for them, feeding them, clothing them. Obviously, the ostriches don't need to be clothed, but they need to be fed and given water. These ostriches are suffering from dehydration. We don't know if they're being fed. And as I said at the top of this broadcast, Spirit, one of the hens, ostrich hens, died yesterday. It clearly looked like she died of neglect, despite the CFIA's erroneous report that this was a pre-existing condition. BS. We are sick of hearing the lies from the CFIA. This is an organization that is all about terrorizing animals. And they're nothing but a bureaucratic death squad. That's all they are. Now let's listen to Katie. And the latest from Katie, and as I said, I was on the phone with her just prior to coming on this broadcast. And I don't know how she holds up as well as she does. It's just constant conflict. She's had her farm occupied by hundreds of RCMP officers who remain on the scene. All of these CFIA executioners who are not cooperating, they literally cannot talk to the CFIA agents. They have to send an email to the head office in Ottawa. They can't check on the care and safety of their birds. They have no idea what's going on. I talked to Kay. I said, can you even tell me how many birds are still there? And she said, we can't confirm or verify that. So, I'm not saying 399 anymore, or even 398, because we don't know. This is an absolute travesty. And not only that, the CFIA is putting poisonous material on the ground. I wonder why they'd be doing that. Now let's listen to Katie here, and I'll show you some ex post.
Shame on you, Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
Shame on you.
Hi everyone, Katie with Universal Ostrich Farms. So it's been brought to my knowledge, we knew yesterday we saw Spirit throwing her head back.
We put the signs up today to show us a picture of our hen, right? They're not tubing her. She's just doing the kick of death. They're not tubing her. They haven't taken care of her. Just let me speak. If we would have just been allowed to care for her.
And that is usually a classic sign of an ostrich struggling and suffering and their end of moments. So I just got confirmation that Spirit is dead. She died and probably in extreme pain, dehydration, and suffered.
And now under the CFIA's care for about a week, and this hen's dying. It looks like they're not actually administering the electrolytes and doing all the things they're supposed to, and the farm is just torn up about it.
Canadian Food Inspection Agency, you've been caught, and I want you to know you've been caught on camera, and this is on you.
See what happens when all the police drones are flying so low? Go away! The police drones are flying so low, they're putting our birds through fences.
The death of that bird, our family, is on you. So we have video of you taking our bags of electrolytes that you were supposed to be administering, you were supposed to be giving her for survival and for her health, to help her heal, to help her not suffer, for her to have a chance, just like we would have done. And you've been caught on camera twice, taking that bag of electrolytes, and once going not even in the vicinity of where she was, walking behind a tree and dumping the electrolytes out.
Did you get that? This is huge. Katie has the evidence on the CFIA deliberately getting rid of the electrolytes. This is beyond neglect. This is intimidation. This is intentional neglect. This is intentional. And we used to say in the military, when somebody really screwed up, we'd say, charge the bastard. That's exactly what should happen here. Somebody needs to be charged here. Somebody needs to be charged.
You are absolute criminals, and you will be held accountable for animal cruelty. You are hiding behind police tape and badges, fear of your accountability, and fear that you will be exposed. This is the first time you're going to be held accountable. You've operated with excessive freedom and no accountability for 21 plus years under the stamping out policy, and this is time. It is time, Canada, that we see this organization fall to its knees and we repair, come up. We're going to build a brand new, incredible organization that is going to protect you. It's going to protect your animals. It's going to protect your rights. And this organization is not going to hide. It is going to be transparent. It's going to be honest, and it's going to be truthful. And it's going to be something that we can all be proud of. Shame on you, Canadian Food Inspection Agency. You just ripped one of our family members away from our family. You made her suffer.
So Katie's talking about rebuilding this organization, just bringing it down and rebuilding something new, something that actually does care for animals, that's really about inspection and not execution. Right on, Katie. Right on. And that's exactly what needs to happen to this organization. And here I want to go to my X page here and to show you a couple things, because we've got time. I still haven't ruled out going out there. I don't know, but we'll see. But I'm hoping we have a Freedom Week here with good news for Chris and Tamara. They are being sentenced on Tuesday. I'll be there in the courtroom. I hope we have a political solution. When Mark Carney meets his good buddy, Donald Trump, this week, I hope Donald Trump has a word for him, and that's leave those birds alone. That's what I'm hoping to hear. That's what I'm hoping to hear. And of course, this has been just, look at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency X site. Safeguarding food, animals, and plants in Canada. What a crock of SHIT that is. So here it is. A rooster at Universal Ostrich Farms was seen on video wobbling and then falling to the ground. Word has it that the CFIA has been spraying the field around the kill pin with a disinfectant called Prevail, which is not safe to be consumed by animals. This is what these people, this execution squad is all about. And as I mentioned, on Tuesday, Tamara Leech and Chris Barber received they could concede it's possible if the Crown wins the day. The Ontario Crown wants 8 years for Chris, 7 years for Tamara, 8 years in jail for mischief, for peacefully protesting. The Canadian government has spent over 3 years and millions of dollars prosecuting Tamara Leech and Chris Barber for mischief, as they let drug dealers, rapists, and other violent criminals out on bail within hours of being arrested. This is what an authoritarian regime looks like. You bet it does. You bet it does. Thanks again, Drea, Humphrey, for the excellent reporting out there. And there's Katie on the mic. She has worked so hard on this story. My heart goes out to her every day. Universal Ostrich Farm calls for criminal charges for whoever is responsible for the death of their hen that was neglected in the CFIA's care. No more allegedly neglected. No more apparently neglected. The CFIA is about death for animals. That's all it's about. It is a bankrupt, vanquished government bureaucracy, and it needs to be terminated. And yeah, here it is. Yeah, this is just sad. Anyway, I'm so fed up with what has gone on here now. I've been on this story since early May. I'll continue to be on the story this week. And thank you for all of you who appreciate me being on this story because I think it is literally, I think it's one of the most important stories of the year. And he's perhaps of the decade. Because, you know, we talked to Jeff Rath for 45 minutes in the first part of this broadcast, and Jeff Rath is saying, what does Canada have left for Alberta? What does Canada have left for Canadians right now? This is a government, as I said in my interview with Jeff Rath, that's got three or four censorship bills in front of Parliament right now. But there's nothing else they want to talk about except restricting free speech and kicking people off the internet for saying things they don't like. What else is the Liberal government doing? A big gun grab. Not the criminals in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver. They want to take the guns away from the farmers in the prairies or in rural Ontario. Yeah, even rural Quebec. They want to take the guns away from farmers. And why? And as our public safety minister, I'm sorry if I get his name wrong, Ananda Sangra, I think, if he admitted in a private conversation that the gun ban isn't going to work. It's unworkable, but it's only going through because of votes in Quebec, as usual. What a corrupt, what a revulsive government this is. Revolting government this is. But that's how Canada works these days, folks. And I'm ashamed to say it's come to this because I remember a better Canada. Even under Liberal governments, it was a better Canada than it is right now. And I don't have the confidence that even a change of government is going to make the country that much better or that much different because things have really gone downhill. So I thank you for watching today. Keep Katie and her family and those ostriches and that farm in your thoughts and your prayers on this Sunday afternoon and this Sunday evening. Send them your love and your concern and just let them know that you're on their side. And we're going to win this. We're going to win this fight with bureaucracy, with authoritarian government. It might be a political solution, or it might be a judicial one. The Supreme Court might come down in the next couple of days and say, hey, we're going to hear the case. There's been so much bad publicity for the government, they might just decide it's worth hearing this case. I'm hoping and praying that happens. If that doesn't happen, I'm hoping and praying for a political solution, and that might involve Donald Trump telling Mark Carney he needs to do something about this because he ain't happy. And it's too bad it's taken pressure from the United States government to potentially end this catastrophe, to intervene, because our own government, our own politicians, in the aggregate, there have been some major exceptions, like Scott Anderson, the member of parliament for the area that includes Edgewood, BC, where Universal Ostrich Farms is located. He's done a great job of liaising with the farm and supporting the cause. Not so much from Pierre Poilievre, who has been a little bit less than clear about what should happen here. Yes, the Liberal government's been incompetent, but we need to say more than that. We need to say that animals must be at least tested before anything else happens, and this operation is called off. We shut down the CFIA right now. That's what needs to happen, folks. Thank you for watching today. I'll be back again at the usual time tomorrow. Thank you for your patience in this broadcast today, and I'll see you all at 10 o'clock on Monday. And Tuesday, we'll be in court, and we'll bring you the results as soon as we know them. God bless you all. God bless what's left of my country. Godspeed to all of you. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and we will see you tomorrow.